right, I'm gonna get started with a quick sketch. And since today is National Hot Cocoa Day, we're gonna do a nice cup of hot chocolate. It'll be piled high with some whipped cream. So we're gonna start with a real flat ellipsis here, or oval. And we need that to meet up with another. It can be smaller in size, but it should be the same kind of footprint going on. So we have a nice, so your cup looks like it's round and not tipping too much one way or the other. We want it to keep the same perspective here. All right, we're gonna add a little bit of the glass here. We're gonna make this hot cocoa in a glass instead of a traditional mug. And I'm gonna add a couple of cinnamon sticks here. And then we will add some whipped cream because every indulgent cup of hot chocolate needs some whipped cream to go along with it. So erase anything that's in your behind your whipped cream there. You don't want that in there. And then we are going to place our cup. It's going to be on a saucer. So we need the same type of footprint, a longer, skinnier ellipsis here. And because of the angle we're looking at this, it needs to have a little bit of a underneath side to the plate as well. And to dress it up just a little bit more over and above the little cinnamon sticks, we're going to add a star anise here. And anise is a lovely spice. It's got a lot of licorice notes to it, and it's actually one of the ingredients in the Christmas cookies that my mother made all growing up in my childhood, and it is the recipe I still use today. All right, so that is all we have for our sketch. I'm gonna put my pencil away, and then we're going to get started on our hot chocolate here. So we're gonna get our medium brush wet, and we're gonna get this whole hot chocolate area wet with just clean water. And because it's in a glass, we've got a lot of reflections and things going on here. So it's gonna take just a minute to build up the color. We're gonna start with some burnt orange. And actually I'm gonna get a few of my colors wet. I'm gonna get all my browns wet. I'm gonna get my Van Dyke brown, my Payne's gray. I'll get my black wet as well, and then some yellow ochre. I think that's it. Okay, so let's go into that burnt orange, and we're gonna work in vertical strokes here because we want to help create that kind of glass reflection-y look here. And I'm gonna lay in most of some vertical strokes with that, and then I'm gonna use this medium brown here, and we're going to add a few more. It's got some darker areas here, and I'm going to get this is a nice like chocolate brown. It's a little bit warmer than the medium brown that I was using. And we're just laying in vertical strokes here with these browns. I'm going to use just the tiniest bit of my burnt umber. It's a very reddish brown. Get that in, and then go back to my burnt orange, kind of fill this in a little bit, and then we'll add a little bit of brown touches over here to create some depth in our hot chocolate. Now if you notice, I'm not getting all of these areas. I'm kind of leaving a few of these areas without any paint applied, and that is because you're going to have some reflections in your glassware. Just a natural look here of the glass. All right, next we're going to add in this whipped cream area that's within the glass that you still see that's below the brim line. And we're going to start with just a little bit of the Payne's gray. We want it kind of diluted. So if you have some touches here that look a little bit dark, we're going to clean our brush and just use the wet clean brush to just soften these. I'm not using a particular stroke because the natural air bubbles that is going to be in that whipped cream is going to create a nice little texture. All right, we're going to use our yellow ochre and go in just below where this the brim of this glass is, and add a few little highlights here with this yellow ochre. And maybe your hot cocoa has mixed a little bit with some of your whipped cream. So you can add a couple little dabs there that even blend in with your hot chocolate line. All right, next I'm going to take some Payne's gray, fairly diluted here, and we're going to add just a few stripes, and this is going to just help us be in keeping with that glassware look. So after I put those in, I'm going to clean my brush, and just with a damp brush, we're going to soften these up. Okay. Next, we're going to add just a few little bubbles in our whipped cream here. A couple little bubbles in there, maybe even one that's got just a touch of the chocolatey brown. All right, now let's move on to our cinnamon sticks here. I'm going to use the burnt sienna. Cinnamon is a very nice, warm, kind of reddish tone to it, and so we're gonna keep those red tones going in it. And as you get close to your whipped cream layer, you're going to need to be real careful so you don't get in there, because with the whipped cream, we're not going to be painting much of it really. We're going to be adding some shadows with the gray, but the rest of it is going to be just the white of your paper. So you want to keep that line nice and crisp. And then we're going to go in with that chocolate brown and add just a little shadow here, and you got some texture that's going on in your cinnamon. So a couple stripes, and then we'll take our clean brush and kind of work those together and soften those up. You don't want it to look like a tiger tail. We want it to be nice and a soft looking color variation in there. And then I'm going to take another one of my darker browns and just add a little bit of shadow and texture here. Next, I'm going to do the other cinnamon stick. I'm going to start off with some burnt sienna near the bottom. And we want this cinnamon stick to look just a little bit different. You want to be able to differentiate between the two of them. So I'm going to start with some burnt sienna near the bottom. And then I'm going to move into my medium brown. If you ever want to see how concentrated is your paint that you're using on your brush, just touch it onto your palette and kind of swirl it around a little bit, and you will see how diluted or concentrated your paint is. So I'm going to go in with a more diluted tone of my medium brown for the top of this, blend it with the burnt sienna, and then I'm going to go in to, this is a real cool kind of a burnt umber, and add some little texturization to this cinnamon stick. Now make sure that as you're doing your cinnamon sticks, you're not rubbing your hand into your hot cocoa there. All right, let's work on the plate next. We want to let these dry before we move into much more of that. So let's move on to the plate, because we don't have we're going to need to leave a little bit of space here because that glass has some thickness. So you need to leave just a little bit of space there so we can show the thickness of that glass later on. So you're not going to actually be touching your hot chocolate. We're going to be using Payne's Gray because we have a nice white plate, and we're going to just show a lot of the little shadows and reflections in this pretty shiny glass ceramic plate. All right, we're going to start out with a kind of like an upside down Nike swish almost around the plate. Get a little bit more concentrated near the outside of the plate. And then as the plate moves down, this is going to get softened up because now we're into getting closer where the light source is going to be. All right, next, let's take our Payne's Gray again, and we're going to move to the other side and the underneath part of this glass. So we're going to add a little bit of a shadow here because we don't like levitating glassware. We're not magicians, so we're going to keep our dishes on the non-levitating side. And let's add a little shadow underneath this star anise. Doesn't need to be anything big or crazy. And then the light source is coming from this direction. So because our our plate is curved upwards, we're going to get a shadow on this side. But as we move this way, now our glass is going to cast a shadow on this side of our plate. So it's going to be a little bit deeper of a shadow towards the center. And it'll get, gradually lighter as it moves away from the center line. And if you need to turn your piece so you can get to that area without messing up any of your other paint, or it's just easier to move that direction when it's turned. Your piece is not stuck to the table. So move it around as you need to. All right, we're gonna get our shadow on the underneath side next. And because this is the underneath side, it's gonna be fairly dark. So we'll start with a nice dark line here. And remember, your plate has some thickness as well. So you need to leave just a little bit of a white line here for that edge of your plate to show the thickness of it. And if you don't have a steady enough hand, or you forgot to, or for some reason it just got away from you, we can always go back in with some Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white and add that afterwards. So it's not the end of the world if that piece didn't get left white. All right, the closer we get to the table, the darker we're gonna make this shadow. All right, and I'm even gonna get a smaller, thinner brush and get into my black and do just a real thin line of black at the very bottom edge where this is going to be touching the tabletop. All right, now let's get just a little rounded edge going on here. We need just a little rounded edge look. So we're going to add a real thin line. Keep that white line there for the top edge of your plate. And we're just going to draw this little line across. So now we've created a little lip for the edge of our plate. And we're going to go around and get the whole edge here. And if your line gets a little bit thicker than you wanted, feel like it's not making a nice delicate piece of pottery, that's fine. All right, now we're going to add some of the glass features, the features that are going to make this glass really pop and come alive. So I'm going to go into my Van Dyke brown, and we'll start with a real dark, deep spot right here. You have to go back in and get it a little more concentrated paint. Go ahead and do that. And we're gonna get like a little reflection of that star anise over here. Get just the littlest bit of the underneath side of that hot chocolate over here. And if it blends, that's fine. We can always come back and darken that up a little bit later. I'm gonna mix just the tiniest bit of Van Dyke brown with some Payne's gray. I want something that's a little warmer than just the Payne's gray, but the Van Dyke brown is a little bit too warm. So I'm gonna add just the outside edges of the glass here, and we're gonna do a little swoop here. Make sure it's not too concentrated. We're starting to lighten these tones up to help get that nice just little glass reflections that they vary so much. All right, let's get some of these other ones in here. We get a little bit darker down here, and we'll go up the sides of this glass just a wee bit. I'm still using that kind of Payne's Gray Van Dyke Brown mixture. I'm going to turn it around. All right, now that we've gotten these basic structural elements of our glass all in, I'm going to add the top rim of our glass, and again, this has some thickness, you know, there's some thickness to the glass. So we're gonna make a bit of a double line here around the top to show just that little bit of thickness in the glass. All right, next we're gonna go in, and we need this shadow to dry before we get our star anise painted in. So we're gonna make our fluffy whipped cream next. And I'm gonna take some of that Van Dyke Brown, and there's gonna be a variation in the shadows and the darkness of these shadows. And so we'll start with the dark, and we can always lighten as we go. We can always darken as well. So we'll start with this bit here, and the light is coming from this direction. And so we need the shadows to be over on this side primarily. So let's get kind of a we'll just start at the top and work our way down. Because this has a little bit of a, you know how the spray cans of whipped cream have those little star shapes, so it's got kind of a fun pattern to it. Texture, we want to show some of that. So we'll be leaving some sides a little darker, you know, making that little pattern in our whipped cream. All right. We're just gonna, this might take a minute, so just be patient. It's gonna take a bit of putting in little shapes and then rinsing your brush and softening the edges. It's gonna take a fair amount of that. So just work a little section at a time. You don't want it to get too dry. Again, if you find it's a little too light for where it is, you can always come in and add more shadows. Now remember, this whole side is all the shadowy side. So the sides, the little mountains and everything on this side are all going to be darker than on the other side. Now that we're moving more towards this lighter side of the whipped cream, we're gonna dilute our shading color a little bit more. I feel like some of these need just a little bit more darker values here. And this one needs to be softened up a bit. If it happens to dry on you, you can always go back with a damp brush and it will soften up. But I feel like it is a little bit easier to do this blending and softening if it's still on the damp side. All right, let's get just the tiniest little outline to this whipped cream. We don't want to leave it with our pencil mark there. We want to make sure that we kind of define with the paint what we've done. This is going to be a very diluted Payne's gray that we're using for this. Now let's make our hot chocolate just the tiniest bit of fun, and we'll add a few chocolate shavings on top. Now I'm just gonna dot some chocolate here and there, and I'm not being careful with my shapes here. Chocolate shavings are never all uniform in size and shape, so I'm using the burnt orange for that, and then I'm going to come back with my chocolate coffee brown color and add just a dab to each of these to give that shadow and dimension. All right, let's get our star anise. Now this star anise is a fairly neutral, so I'm going to use my medium brown. Seems a little too concentrated here, so I'm going to clean my brush, wet it, and just go back in and dilute. I'm going to paint the whole thing in, and we will come back and add our shadows. All right, I'm going to use burnt umber here. And we will also use some Payne's gray in just a minute. All right, we're gonna, star anise has such a beautiful texture. So we're gonna add some of these just little details here. All right, I'm gonna get my Payne's gray, or not my Payne's gray, excuse me, my Van Dyke brown. And we're gonna add some even deeper values here. Now we've got a lot of this that's kind of in the shadow of that cup of hot chocolate. Now I'm being a little loose with my painting here. And if you prefer some more crisp lines, you can always go up and be a little more precise with your brush strokes. All right. I'm gonna get just a little teeny bit of a tabletop underneath this saucer here, and you know, why not have a little fun? It is Christmas, so let's pretend that it's on a little green tablecloth here. So we'll brush this green. This is a deep green, or a hooker's green, I think, if you're using standard paint colors. I don't want anything that's too blue. I want a very true green color here. All right, I'm gonna go all the way around my saucer. Remember to leave that little space for the glass. All right, I'm gonna take my larger brush. I don't want it super dried off. I want it still fairly damp, but not dripping wet. And I'm gonna start rubbing in some water over here and then softly getting into that green to just agitate the edge of it to soften up that edge just a bit. And let that paint kind of just blend and soften up the edge on its own. All right, and there right underneath the plate, we also need to create that shadow under there. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of my black and some of my green. We're gonna mix the two together to make a nice deep green. And we're gonna lay that in right underneath our plate. You can always layer this if you feel like it needs a little bit more of a shadow. All right. Now, the last thing I want to do is add just a little bit of highlights to my glass. So I'm going to take my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White in my thin brush, my real small one, and we're just going to add some little highlights here. Most of them are going to be kind of in the vertical orientation. And you can always water this down just a wee bit so you can get some highlights that are just not quite so concentrated. And of course, you can always go in with a clean, wet brush and just soften those up, smooth them out a little bit. Not all of them. Some of them should look nice and crisp and bright. Some of them need to be a little bit calmed down. All right. And finally, I always sign my pieces and date them. This is an optional thing, but I always like to go back and look and see the progress I've made over the years. So I do sign and date mine. And if you don't feel like you can control a small brush well enough to sign your name, you can always use these little micron pens. They're great for little details like that, and they are waterproof. And the other option is a glass pen, which I do not have, but you can load it up with a brush with some real diluted watercolor and sign with a glass pen if you want to keep just watercolor on your paper. All right, and that is our delicious looking cup of hot chocolate. So thank you for joining me, and I hope that you follow along and subscribe, like this video so I am able to reach additional families and keep offering these lessons to you. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you guys enjoy a lovely cup of hot chocolate.